So let me see. I don't know como se chama aí quem está por trás da organização, hein, pessoal do IBCI?
Which one, sorry?
Lucas. Ah, obrigada, Eduardo. Okay. Thank you very much, Lucas. So we can start now our panel. And first of all, I would like to say good afternoon to all of you, our panelists, our audience. It's a great pleasure to be here in this panel to present the book called Populism and Antitrust of Maciej Bernatt. Please, Maciej, the pronunciation, you can help me, from the University of Warsaw. And also it's a great pleasure to be here with Pablo Trevisán, that is a commissioner at the Commission National of Defense of the Competition Defense, and also María in Argentina, and María José Contreras Velasco, that is General Director of Mexican Competition Authority. So this is a great opportunity to discuss this issue so important in relation to antitrust, that is the populism. No? It's an issue that is very present in our region, and it's very important to be discussed in a manner to think about antitrust law enforcement. So, Maciej, thank you very much for this opportunity for accepting this invitation, to present your book. Maciej Bernatt is Associate Professor of Law at the University of Warsaw. He holds a habilitation PhD and master titles in law and a second master title in international relations. He's also director of the Center for Antitrust and Regulatory Studies of the Faculty of Management of the University of Warsaw in Poland, and he held visiting fellow appointments at the academic institution in Australia, Germany, and the United States. Well, he lies in an intersection of competition law and constitutional law, administrative law, and UA law. So his research builds on professional experience gained at the policy judiciary and the human rights sector as well, as broader interests in politics, economics, history. So, Maciej, thank you very much. Please, you have the word.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be with you and to present my book. As you will see, my focus, my main research came from Europe, in particular Central Europe. But I am really looking forward to our discussion, hoping that we will have an opportunity to discuss this topic in Latin American context. So I will be focusing. I will walk you through my book, underlining some of central issues. The book will be out in January, so it's still a little bit of time. But I think it is quite relevant, at least when it comes to the situation in Europe. We still have countries in Central Europe facing, for example, rule of law crisis, and this is the topic that is today very much discussed within the European Union. So I started my book thinking about my book back in 2015, when we observed a political change in Poland, quite a radical one in my opinion, and I decided to observe, to think whether this political but also economic change that happened has or can have an influence competition law system. I think it's quite obvious that today we can say that competition law is part of rule book of many countries in the world, and some of these countries are ruled by the politicians that can be described as populist. So I was asking myself a question: what's an impact of rule of populist governments on competition law system? And I was looking at institutions, agencies, and courts on enforcement of competition law, and the way in which these changes interact with a regional system of competition law, focusing on the EU competition law system. And my book hopefully speaks to some broader debates, in particular the one on the link between democracy and markets. We can ask ourselves a question whether liberal markets need to, or somehow should be somehow connected to liberal democracy. We know that there are countries in the world that's obvious today that have capitalism as an economic system, but they are not democratic, at least not liberal democratic. But still, here for my book, the question was, if you see certain processes that are affecting liberal democracy, whether you can also say that this has an impact on economic regulation and finally on the functioning of market. And there are broader debates concerning nationalism, protectionism, and inequality. In my book, as I already briefly said, my research focused on developments in Hungary and Poland. You may be not familiar with that, but the change that took place happened in 2010 in Hungary and in 2015 in Poland. In case of Hungary, it went so far that the majority was big enough to change the constitution. But I was also looking at developments in other post-transformation countries. So my focus was on post-transformation countries. I hope that this may be relevant for Latin America. And in Europe, I identified some relevant examples in Czech Republic and Greece, in Latin America, in Venezuela, in Africa, in South Africa, and in Asia, I was looking to an extent at India. My focus was to try to identify the manifestations of populist impact on competition law systems. So my book is not like that I present country case studies. It's more about thinking how the rule of populist governments may impact competition law system, and I'm trying to propose a certain conceptual framework in this respect. And my research was based not only on legal analysis, but there was also quite a lot of empirical research. I conducted in-depth interviews with antitrust experts, but I also relied on existing statistical data. So that's as an introduction. So what I had to do first was trying to understand what's really populism, and I think we could have a very long discussion. What I identified in the literature, particularly among political scientists, is that that obviously authors disagree, but it seems to be an agreement that populists speak and claim to act in the name of pure people, often a nation, sovereign, and they confront it with elite. So there is this approach that populist politicians they claim to speak directly in the interest of ordinary people. By the way, this is one of the reasons that is very often identified, that they don't like intermediary institutions that are typical for liberal democracy. And there can be a link with, at least in some countries, but I think that this will happen very often, with nationalism, where these pure people are defined as an ethnical nation. What seems to be particularly relevant is that we may have a discussion what really is the populism, but if we look at the practice of populists being in power, the existing evidence shows that this rule is a challenge to the main institutions and values of liberal democracy, most notably pluralism, separation of powers, checks and balances, rule of law, and minority rights. So there is a link between populism and illiberalism. So we may have still a democracy, but not necessarily a liberal democracy. So we'll have elections, periodical elections, but we may be missing other pieces that are central for liberal democracy. And this is also related to the literature, that the rule of populist governments is analyzed in the context, and I'm also part of this literature of democratic backsliding. So we have a certain standard, certain level, and we see sort of a process of deterioration. And I was trying to, when thinking about the relation between populism and democracy, I was looking at the practice, what actually happens in the countries, and here is my list. I don't have time to go into details, but what's relevant for competition law system is capture of courts, or at least undermining some safeguards of independence of judiciary. Also dismantling of professional civil service. We could see that both in Hungary and in Poland, and there are also some relevant examples from other countries I analyzed. But this is not something, and this is maybe important for my book, that this is not the story that is black and white. We are rather talking about different shades of gray. So we may have these processes or these examples happening, but they don't necessarily have to happen always or in the same manner or to the same extent. So my starting point was looking at this change at democracy. The second one was, and we're still within chapter 2 of my book, was to look how the rule of populist government generally affects economy and economic regulation. And the evidence I collected from Central Europe is that we can observe a departure from liberal market-oriented vision of economy that was kind of a paradigm in countries in our region in the 90s, but I think this may also be true for some countries in Latin America. Certainly, we can discuss Washington consensus in this context. Post-transformation countries embracing free market at the same time. By the way, they were in our region embracing the liberal democracy. What we see once populist governments enter into the power is that there is this concentration of power. It's not only linked to political side, but also economic side. We see a growing role of state in the economy. State is increasingly becoming an owner. So for example, privatization processes are halted. And at the same time, we also see economic patriotism, and in some instances, economic patriotism may result finally in protectionism. And these are my examples from Central Europe. So, for example, in Hungary, we could see nationalization and monopolization of some sectors of economy. In both in Poland and in Hungary, we could see a consolidation and growing concentration on some markets and certain pro-incumbent policies. And one of the questions that it is linked to my book, but I was not looking that deeply into that, but this relates to the question of chronism and corruption, but maybe not an obvious corruption, but rather institutionalized one. And again, here we are talking about certain processes, and these are just the examples, and the existence and the intensity of these processes may vary. So I was trying from this perspective to identify certain illiberal aspects of populism that are relevant for competition law system, and these are the two: departure to an extent from liberal democracy and free market economy, and these two phenomena inform the variables by means of which I was trying to assess the impact of ruling populists on competition law system. So what I identified as these two variables is in particular the extent of decline of checks and balances in the rule of law, and secondly the extent of revaluation of the free market economic model into this more state-centered one. And on this basis, in chapter 3, I propose certain scenarios of this impact, and then in later chapters where I will present the evidence I found, I was trying to link a certain situations, certain manifestations of impact of rule of populist government on competition law system, and somehow it link it to these different scenarios. So, but I can maybe during the discussion part I will have a chance to discuss it more in detail. But you can see from this that the construction is the farthest reaching scenario. It is the situation when we see both the decline of checks and balances in the rule of law and this revaluation of the free market economic model. Marginalization is something where you see that the checks and balances are still in place. So the system is somehow working, but the general environment is not so friendly anymore to competition. Case of atrophy scenario is more about decline of checks and balances, and this is the scenario in which simply competition law system is not relevant anymore. It may be working, but there are certain negative effects going on as well. So that was this is my model. I can discuss it more in detail later on, but I wanted to show you some evidence what I identified. So there are two major chapters. The first one is looking at institutions, and chapter 5 is looking at enforcement. In chapter 4, I identified manifestations of the influence of populist government on competition agencies and courts, and I was looking at different areas. First, independence of competition agencies, and I collected evidence that shows that appointment process is increasingly politically driven. In case of Hungary, I observed a limited autonomy of decision makers within the agency structure, that was an interesting finding, that you may have the same institution that was not really changed institutionally, and you have a competition council as a collegial body within the agency. But when I was discussing this with my interviewees, they were saying that in practice the role of competition council changed a lot, that it is not anymore kind of an independent tribunal within the agency. It was also interesting to observe how that there was a certain interaction between the political change and actual change of people working at the agency, and a general perception of agency and independence is a negative one. Secondly, I was looking at operating capabilities, so there was a change of leaders and weak replacements. Weak in a sense that people that came were not necessarily the experts in the field of competition law. This is not to offend anyone who is working in the agency, but if we look from the expertise perspective at the moment of employment, we can see that the people that were hired were laymen, very often young people. And the parallel process was attrition of senior staff and staff with special knowledge. For example, in case of Hungary, at some point, chief economist and his whole team left, and that was related allegedly to one of the high-profile case that was pending before the agency. What I see as a problem, but this may be the processes that were also present earlier, is high staff fluctuation. So people don't earn a lot of money, so they have incentives to leave the agency and work for the private sector. And also, generally speaking, this rule of populist government is not a time when competition law enforcement is somehow financially prioritized. So we can say that financial resources are insufficient. There is also another thing I was looking at was the scope of competences of competition agencies. I can leave it for the discussion. And generally speaking, if you see that an agency has different competencies, it is not necessarily that during the rule of populist government, competition law enforcement is something that is very important within this agency's competence. A big question is about judicial review, whether it is still offering a sufficient check on agency action. And in particular in Poland, we could see that certain reforms of judiciary that took place, they were relevant also for a competition law system. For example, the structure of Polish Supreme Court was changed in such a way that there is a new division of the court dealing right now with the competition law cases. And one could say that expertise that existed within the Supreme Court is not there. Was somehow lost, and this expertise was on high level. So that's, I'm really doing my best to offer you some hints in what you can find in the book. So another chapter is about enforcement, and I was trying to establish how enforcement looks like. So one of the things, and this is finding a direct evidence may be difficult, but what I could identify is that the big cases that are opened are usually those who have kind of a political backup, political support. So you don't see a lot of high-profile cases other than this, in which there is clearly a political agreement for the agency to open open certain cases. The only really high-profile case that Hungarian Competition Agency had was about banking sector in this, and at that time banking sector was part of political agenda. However, what seems to me even more interesting is sort of a self-restraint. So it seems that competition agencies are becoming quite careful in not opening certain cases. For example, in relation to SOEs, we could see in my region that there was quite a robust enforcement against SOEs. It is not in place anymore. You could say that simply market changed, but I believe that there are some other reasons that may explain limited enforcement against SOEs. And there are also some mergers that were cleared, in my opinion, without proper in-depth analysis. So what you see is overall limited enforcement. A case of Hungary is also quite interesting because there was a case in which competition agency opened a case concerning agriculture sector, and the law was passed that basically limits competition agency powers to conduct cartel proceedings in concerning agriculture sector, and this law actually applied to pending cases. So it really translated into lack of enforcement in this area, and there was quite a lot of enforcement before. I was also looking at advocacy, and it seems that agency is not playing any more a relevant role. It doesn't have a power to oppose a certain changes in economic regulation that may have a negative impact on competition on the market. Yeah, so that's about advocacy, and in chapter 6 I looked at regional system, the European Union. I will be not discussing this at the moment, but I'm open for the discussion. Maybe this is a little bit less relevant for you. So let me present now my main conclusions. So I was at the end of my book in chapter 7. I was trying to somehow link these manifestations of impact of the rule of populist government on competition law system to different scenarios. I proposed in chapter 3, and there are these characteristics. You can say that the accumulation is taking place in case of the construction scenario, but there are some specific characteristics for marginalization scenario. This is the self-restraint I discussed, and atrophy scenarios, for example, new competencies that are unrelated to agencies' competition mandate. And my general observation is also the one that there is a role to be played by checks and balances, and certainly I don't think that the construction scenario will fully materialize in a country where you will still have independent courts being able to exercise an effective judicial review. I also, in relation to this broader debate I was in the last chapter, I tried to propose a certain model of interaction between populism, democracy, competition law, and markets. We can say that populism is affecting democracy, and this change is of relevance for competition law. And if competition law is not applied properly, for example, in media sector, that was one of the merger cases in Hungary, we can say that this adverse effect on democracy is also taking place through through lack of existence of proper system of competition law system, and this may in turn enhance the rule of populist governments, and the same on the market side. So this is the model I was trying to propose to elaborate in final chapter. I also was thinking in terms of, because if we come back to these scenarios, you can also look at them as a sort of a prediction, what may happen. So it doesn't have to be the story about Poland, Hungary, Venezuela, but it can simply be the story of something that can happen in the future in a country where you will have a rule of politicians that undermine liberal democracy and that are, going towards this statist direction of economy. So I was trying to think what could be done, and I am not naive. If this political change will be very far-reaching, competition law system will be affected, but I believe that there is something that can be done. So the first area is about enhancing resilience of competition law system, so enhancing independence of competition agency, while remembering about accountability. Due process and timing is important. Judicial review is important. I'm proposing some ideas in this respect. The general democratic surrounding is important. It is also very important for the competition agency to have allies. So, for example, I didn't have a chance to discuss that, but in the EU there was this Siemens-Alstom merger, and European Commission was under heavy political even criticism by some of the governments, but you could see that DG Competition has strong allies. This may not necessarily exist on the level of countries like EU member states. But the other thing, and this is maybe more controversial, is about how to respond to the reasons that lie behind the rise of populist governments. And the question is what enforcement, competition law enforcement should be focused on. I believe that practices harming broader society is something that competition agencies should prioritize. There is a question about inequalities, combating entry barriers. So the market really can be seen as this is in line, for example, with what Eleanor Fox was always saying, that existence on the market is very important. So the fact that you can enter the market and really develop there. So this is something that competition agencies should look at. One of the questions, and this is part of the discussion today, is whether we should broaden the goals of competition law, but we can discuss that. I think there is a scope for discussion, but certainly we need a framework under which we will minimize the risk of abuse of power by competition agencies. The proper methodology in this respect seems to be necessary. So I was trying to kind of show you what my book is about, and I'm really looking forward for your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Maciej. It's a very interesting presentation on a book, very complex and very also propositive. It's very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. And now, we are honored to count with the presence of two specialists in antitrust issues with a practical experience for antitrust authorities of Mexico and Argentina that is going to comment this very interesting book. And I would like to start from Argentina with Pablo Trevisán, that he is also co-author of the Argentine Competition Act, enacted in 2018. Is currently partner at the studied Trevisán abogados in Argentina, where he was a commissioner at the Argentine Competition Commission, also founder and director of the Institute of Competition Law, has his Master of Law at London School of Economics and Political Science, visiting fellow, research fellow at Fordham School of Law, and he's on his PhD at the Pontificia Universidad Católica in Argentina. Also is part of the International Advisory Board of the Institute for Consumer Antitrust Studies at Loyola University of Chicago in United States. And he was chair of the Competition Commission of the Colegio de Abogados de la Ciudad de Buenos Aires. Pablo, thank you very much for your presence. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation to discuss this book. So please feel free to have the word. Thank you very much.
Obrigado você, Fabiola. Eu sou torcedor da River Plate, aqui da Argentina. Obrigado também para o Instituto Brasileiro da Concorrência e Inovação pelo convite. Thank you very much for the invitation to the IBCI. Maciej, I really enjoyed reading your book. Some parts of it got this feeling of I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, by which things that were how you put them in your book. And honestly, I tried to put some ideas in order and share my own conclusions of your ideas on your book with the Argentinian experience. And Fabiola, María, José, it's obviously a pleasure to share with you the panel. I will share a presentation just to help my own presentation. Well, at the end of the book, Maciej, you showed this relationship between democracy, competition law, and markets, and how populism may have some impact on these scenarios. And I think from there we can get some lessons on also for the Argentinian case. Let me start with the Argentinian case. In our own constitution since 1853 and until the last reform in 1994, Argentina has a constitutional model that is not only economic, but it's also political and social. And one of the main pillars of our constitution is freedom, human freedom. So from there, at least when you read the constitution, there you will find expressly since 1994, but obviously since the beginning of the constitutional period in 1853, the conditions for competition in the market, and those markets would not exist if there's no economic freedom. And that economic freedom obviously derives from the human freedom. So those are very important concepts in our constitution, the current constitution in Argentina. And something I always like to say when I give classes at the university is these rights are not absolute, definitely not absolute. And they also obviously have sort of a coin, two-sided. You have the rights and the guarantees of the Constitution, but you also have some obligations and prohibitions sometimes behind or near to those rights that you have. So, said that, in your book also you identified some variables, some challenges that might be presented whenever some populist governments are in place in any given country. As you said in your presentation, populism rejects certain characteristics of liberal democracy in a certain way. In that sense, in Argentina, and as I said, having a constitutional model based on liberty or on freedom, that might also be, in our case, conducts that might be unconstitutional or against our constitution. But that's another discussion. But for these challenges that you mentioned and these variables, limiting of fundamental freedoms, limiting the role of the Congress, put the judiciary or the judicial branch under pressure, are some of the challenges that you identified in your book. But I would like to stress specifically in two of them. And one is this, the extent to which there is a dismantling of these checks and balances that are necessary on a system like ours, based on the three executive, legislative, judiciary branches. and the rule of law, and the reevaluation of the free market economic model. So these two variables, I think that, as you also put in your book, are those who might more specifically affect competition law and policy in any given country. From your impact scenario of these two variables, reevaluation of the free market economic model and the decline of checks and balances and the rule of law, if I had to say where the Argentinian competition law and policy system is located, I would say that it's in between, or sometimes is on the deconstruction scenario, and sometimes it's more sort of a marginalization scenario. I wouldn't say atrophy or limited impact, but it, as you also put in your book, it depends on the color of the government, the moment in time, the moment in history in which you try to analyze competition law and policy in our country. As also Kovacic and María López-Galdós put in life cycles of competition agencies, I think there's also a life cycle also in our country. So let me just give you a very short chronology of the Argentinian competition policy and law in our country. I mean, there's a phrase there, quien se quema con la leche ve la vaca y llora. That who burns with milk sees the cow and cries. That's something very popular in our country. And at the end of the chart, you see, will we ever see the independent agency in place, or would the independent agency see the light? And I think that's one of the issues that you also mentioned on the institutional side. That is definitely something very important to see, and to see how it evolves or not evolves. So Argentina has had some sort of competition law since almost a century. The first law was enacted in 1923, but the first enforcement authority was put in place or created in 1980. So we've had almost 6 years of no enforcement authority. But it took us 16 years to appoint the first president of the commission. So there you also see some sort of loopholes in the history. What happened in the middle? Why the first president was only appointed 16 years later? That's something we can discuss later. In 1999, the first independent authority was created in Argentina, but unfortunately that independent authority never saw the light. It was never created until an act in 2014 eliminated definitely the creation of the TNDC. And before that, the Supreme Court and other courts of appeal have referred to this non-creation of the independent authority that it was in the text of the law. It was a legal scandal. At least in 2014, it was eliminated. I mean, at least we sort of put in practice or in the law what was happening in reality. In 2018, there was the last reform, and again, we tried to create a new independent authority. And I'd say we tried because, as Fabiola mentioned, I was involved in the drafting of the bill, and the commission, at that time, we were involved in drafting and negotiating that bill. And unfortunately, for reasons that we might also discuss, until today, although it's in the written text of the law, the independent authority has not been put in place. So that's a history of our chronology of our country. The substance of law is shaped by institutions. So you can imagine that between 1923 and 1980, although we have a constitutional goal or pillar on freedom and competition has its place, there was no enforcement authority, so there were very few cases, and all of them were neither material nor substantial in the sense of competition case law. So since 1980 until today, we do have enforcement authority, but it has never been independent in practice, although we have had some periods between 1999, as I said, until 2014, in which we were supposed to have an independent authority that was never created. And nowadays, we are sort of reliving the same situation in which we do have formally in the text of the law, we are supposed to have an independent authority, but for whatever reason, that authority has not been put in place yet. So that's also related again with the independence and the institutional design and institutional setting of the authority. So I think in Argentina, this poor implementation of the wording of the law is one of the main problems and one of the main challenges that you may find whenever you have a populist government. Because so let me just put my the lens in the period in which I was commissioner, and which I could maybe give a more informed opinion on how things worked at the agency. I think there's plenty of things we did quite well. We did an important work on pushing a new act, drafting, as I said, negotiating, and getting that bill finally enacted in the Congress. But I think there were some implementation pitfalls, not only the non-creation of independent authority, but also some decrease of secondary legislation. But that's where you see the details, or the devil in the details, where the law was ruled, or for example, in the hierarchies or ranks of the members of the authority, there are some issues that were changed and are not following exactly what the law says, or the merger control, but that's another discussion. We did also decide a lot of cases, but honestly, quantity is not always the same as quality. And we did a comeback to the international area. But going more to your presentation, as I said, the devil is in the details. And these are the challenges that I find that some practices that we found when we got into the commission, and honestly, I think we couldn't get rid of them in a very significant extent. For example, the lack of transparency. Some of the acts of the authority are not public, are not published. So some of the opinions of the commission or the resolution of the Secretary of Trade that actually, just a footnote, the authority in Argentina is not the commission, it's mainly the Secretary of Trade, that it needs to have the preview or the prior opinion of the commission. But I mean, the authority in real terms is the Secretary, not the commission. But said that, in my opinion, that I think those decisions or acts of the authority or the administrative agency have to be published and made available to everybody immediately. Just to give you an example, there was a recent case in which we decided still investigation. We voted and we voted or signed our opinions at the commission. There was a majority vote of 4 votes, and there was 1 minority vote, that was mine, that we provided the opinion, and then the secretary decided that case. If you go to the webpage of the commission, you will not find it, and that's something I think we need to change. But anyway, the wording of the resolution also, there's sometimes there are issues like, for example, when you refer to the opinion of the commission, all the votes of the opinion at the commission are definitely part of that opinion. So the wording of those resolutions by the authority are sometimes confusing, and some practices when publishing the opinions also make you think that they might be done better. For example, if you publish a 300 pages resolution and you put something at the end, maybe nobody will read it. And that's something I think we can definitely improve. Due process practices or voting practices, sometimes you see some postponing or never-ending postponement of votes. Or if you ask what happened with a certain case, regresó a estudio, re-enter to be studied. When you get that decision, when you get that answer, you could be in a problem because the case might get, the terms could get expired and prescripción in Spanish. So in those cases, for example, another example, in November, December 2019, we issued our opinion of the commission, again, 4-1, on a liquid oxygen case. It was a cartel. And as far as I know, neither the secretary of the former government nor any of the secretaries of the current government had decided the case, or at least that was not published. So we don't know where that case is. So I'm afraid if I ask the commission, they might answer regresó a estudio. It was got in again to be restudied. And again, the prescription and the terms of might have expired. Or on the other way, as you may postpone certain votes, there are some votes that might also be accelerated. There are lots of examples, but I mean, there's one particular example that I'd like to comment here is on the 29th of November, 2019, with my wife, we decided to take one day off, a Friday. That was a Friday. So we went to the Iguazu waterfalls. It took off Friday, Saturday, I came back. And when I came back, I saw that they had signed more than 50 opinions. Honestly, that was not normal because the average of decisions in the commission within the period 2007, 2015 were not more than 70 cases per year. In a day, we signed more than 50 opinions. So that's. I'm not saying that there was something illegal here. I think those things couldn't happen in the proceeding or in the functioning of an authority. But so projecting the future and using your own words, Maciej, I don't know what is going to happen in the future, but if we want to have this impact of either populism, but I would also say corruption or some other ideas that might not only limit it to corruption, if we don't want to get any constitutional, for example, challenge to the decisions of the authority, if we want to minimize the involvement of corrupted practices, or if we want to, for whatever reason, want to limit the challenges posed by populism. So in the devil, as in the detail, the devil is also the salvation. So in my opinion, and following again your book, I would say that we need to enhance resilience and the institutional setting of the authorities, and mainly in three main aspects: independence, transparency, and accountability of the authority. Independence and merit-based authorities or members of the authority, and a transparent selection process. The process that we included in the bill that was enacted in 2018 is very transparent. It's quite complex. Some say it's too complex, but honestly, although with a very late, I mean, the former government started the selection proceeding maybe too late, in my opinion, and finished the selection proceeding too late. And that gave reasons for the new government to declare that selection process to be void and null. And so, although we did have the candidates proposed by the former government, they never saw the light, as I say. So we still don't have the independent authority. But again, in the text of the law, there's a very transparent selection process that would, in my opinion, allow to have a more independent authority, to have more autonomous decisions. Also, clear rules against undue dismissals of members. That's something you've also mentioned in your book. That's something that is included in the text of the law. If we have the independent authority in place, those rules should definitely be clear and applied. Internal wars to safeguard autonomy. That's something that you also refer in your book, projecting to the future and in the independence side of things of the authority. And I think that's important because when we made the institutional design of the authority, we decided to have those who investigate and those who decide within the authority, but with very clear internal walls, so that that who investigate has to do his job without full autonomy, and also that who resolves has full autonomy. Retention of experienced and expert staff. That's something I think we could have done a better job. There are some experienced and expert staff, as you know, in the authorities that sometimes are more flexible, are not that limited by any political interference or external interference. So those are important staff that should be retained whenever possible. And also communicate, so as to build a good external perception. That might go hand by hand with advocacy and market investigations. So related also with communication transparency, as I said, the publicity of the acts. Any administrative act of the authority should be made public immediately. Obviously, whenever there are confidentiality issues, those should be respected. But that would be the exception. The norm should be publicity of the acts, and avoid refer practices that I mentioned before, how you vote, the wording of the resolution, and how you publish the decisions of there. And to finish with my presentation, also accountability. That's something you mentioned in your book and in your previous presentation. And I think in our case, in order to have a more accountable authority, you also need that authority have internal rules of proceedings that should be public, and that should show the general public how the authority decides, how the authority investigates, and not only to the general public, but also inside the authority. So in that sense, having mechanisms of how do you draw the cases, how each case will go to each of the members of the authority. So you have a lead investigator, because believe me, if you don't have one lead investigator, and I have thousands of cases, if you don't have one lead investigator, everyone is responsible. At the same time, none of the authorities is responsible on the investigation. That's a mess within the authority. So those mechanisms should be put in place and be public. And a balanced allocation of resources, not limited only to human resources, but also other resources. Compensation systems in case of somebody with an impediment to act, somebody who you cannot maybe know in a particular case because in your previous life you defended one of the parties, whatever, or vacancy, either for resignation or some death. So in those cases, you need to have also this compensation system to redistribute the cases within the authority, but again, objective, transparent, etc. And finally, respect the principles of equanimity, in the sense of there should be an equilibrium between the authority and the members of the authority, and obviously a full, timely, and permanent information for those meetings of we call the plenary, that I think in Mexico they use the same term, when all the authorities have to be in a meeting. Okay, that should be informed, timely, and fully to all the members, and also other meetings that might not be plenary meetings, but there are some ordinary or extraordinary meetings that definitely need to be convened reliably and with sufficient and reasonable notice to all the authorities. So this is mainly what I wanted to share, Maciej. I don't know if I managed to follow your own ideas, but I did my best to try to identify what I found were some of the loopholes or the gaps and the challenges that you may face, at least in Argentina, if a populist government is in place, was in place, or will be in place in the future. So thank you very much. That was it.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you for your enlightening comments on the book, putting in perspective the Argentinian system of antitrust and competition in relation to Maciej's work. So before giving the floor over to Maciej for your comments on Pablo reflections, I would like to invite our audience, if have any comments or questions, so they can put in chat, and we will take them for the panel, so the panelists can respond. So please, I would like to give the floor to Maciej for any comment related to Pablo considerations on your work.
Thank you very much, Pablo. This was very, very interesting, and I really appreciate that you did this, I think, maybe difficult exercise to try to understand the framework I propose, and then think to what extent it is relevant in case of Argentina. So thank you for that. I know something very little, I guess, about Argentina and competition law system in Argentina. That was not part of my book, but I knew, and this is what you confirmed, that you can say that there are certain waves and ups and downs. I think maybe the difference, I don't know if you agree, is that the question is whether in Argentina you established a very well-working competition agency with a lot of cases, a robust enforcement. And I understand that was something that was happening between 2016 and 2020, and I hope that this will stay and it will be it will be continued. But maybe just to think about, just also about maybe differences is that in the context of Central Europe, I was looking at the agencies that were not perfect, but for more than 20 years did quite a good job and had a lot of cases. And then I was thinking what happened. So I don't know if I identify it correctly, but I understand that in case of Argentina, they may be still some job to be done. And I really like your comment about this, because this is something that informed my book, the difference between, so to say, law in books and law in action. So if you think about independence, you may have a very nicely written safeguards of agencies' independence, and then the question is whether the agency is actually independent. And the big question, also I think particularly relevant for a lawyer, is how to measure that. But for example, in the EU at the moment, there is the ECN plus directive was passed by the EU, and it needs to be transposed within the national systems of member states. The question is whether it will really bring a change when it comes to actual independence of some of the competition agencies. I think it's a lot about hiring. It's a lot about competencies of the people, and it is also very much about the limits within which the competition agency is functioning. So what I heard from one of my interviewees in Hungary was that maybe we shouldn't be so pessimistic, because in 2010 the agency could have been scrapped completely, while it is still there and it is doing some job. But if you look from the point of view of independence, in particular the self-restraint approach, I think you can say that despite the fact that they have quite a lot of safeguards in the system, they are not necessarily protecting fully the agencies. I understand that this may be of relevance for Argentina. So just a thought, but I will be happy to continue our discussion and learn more from you also in the future.
Thank you, Maciej.
Thank you, Maciej. Pablo, I don't know if you have any additional comment. Please let me know. And well, also it's a great honor to have here María, José, Contreras de Velasco with us in this panel to comment on the Maciej's book. So María José, she has a degree in economics from the Meritorious Autonomous University of Puebla and a master's in economic policy and public policy from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Since 2014, she has been part of the General Directorate for Promotion and Competition, and first as Director of Collaboration with the public and academic sectors, later as a Deputy General Director of the Promotion of Competition, and currently as General Director. She teaches industrial organizations and economic regulation class at Ibero-American University, where she also has taught the subjects of institutional economics and regulation and macroeconomics. She was a researcher at the Research Center for Development, where she also served as a coordinator for the Mexican Network of Competition and Regulation. She has also worked as a consultant for the Inter-American Development Bank and the Inter-American Network on Government Procurement and the Center for Economic Performance at the London School of Economics. Well, a very interesting experience. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Maria José. So please, you have the word.
Thanks, Fabiola, for the introduction. It's an honor for me to be part of this discussion along Pablo and Maciej. Congratulations on your work, and thanks to IBCI for the opportunity and this space to talk about this mind-opening work. Well, in my opinion, I think that the main contribution of Maciej's research lies in offering this analytical framework to identify and manage the impact of these manifestations of populism on competition law systems. This framework can even be helpful, as Maciej was saying, to prevent and to prepare for some of these manifestations, even when they haven't already appeared. So this work then is beneficial not only for those countries who are already facing populism, but also for those who are before the possibility of it. I would like to focus my intervention on what I found a very interesting proposal in Maciej's work, which is that advocacy can, and in my opinion, should be used as a response tool for populism. The reason is obvious. The advocacy is what I do at the Mexican Competition Authority, and therefore I am a strong believer of its high potential to make a difference. The advocacy role of competition agencies consists basically, and according to the OECD, in its broad participation in the formulation of the country's economic policies, which may negatively impact competitive market structure, business conduct, and economic performance. The role of competition advocacy implies acting proactively to bring government policies that lower barriers to entry, promote deregulation, and promote also trade liberalization, and otherwise minimize unnecessary government intervention in the marketplace. In this sense, I think that competition advocacy can help addressing all three of the main challenges proposed or posed by populism governments to competition law systems that Maciej identifies in his book. First, jeopardizing the independence and expertise of the competition authorities and courts. Second, transforming the use of competition law into protectionists and safe enforcement of the law. And third, endangering regional competition law systems. I do think that competition advocacy can be a strong tool to minimize the effects on these three areas. And to explain why, let me please make 3 points. First, I think that competition advocacy is the main tool through which agencies can enhance the recognition among a broader sector of the society of the benefits and competition. Moreover, advocacy activities can contribute to increase the generalized understanding on why it is important to construct, maintain, and protect the competition law system in a country. This recognition and understanding can help enhancing resilience when facing populist challenges in the way Maciej proposes in his book. There is a long way for competition agencies in this regard. For example, in Mexico 7 years ago, we conducted a survey and we found that only 2% of the general population knew the competition authority. A few years later, we conducted interviews with our stakeholders, mainly specialized lawyers and business persons, and we found that 90% of the polled people had a limited knowledge on what the competition law said and what were the rights and the obligations they have under it. Since then, we have implemented a vigorous advocacy strategy across different sectors, for example, the academia, media, the private sector, with other public authorities and the general audience, in order to increase the awareness of why competition is beneficial for the economy and how the work of the competition agency improves social welfare. Last year, for example, a senator in Mexico brought before Congress a constitutional reform to considerably modify the institutional arrangement of the competition system in Mexico by merging 3 of the main organisms, including the competition authority, and also decreasing its level of autonomy. The reaction of the public opinion to this proposal was such that shortly after, the initiative was withdrawn by the senator. This might be an example of how advocacy helped enhancing resilience to maintain the independence of the authority. Not all is right. Maciej mentions in his book that illiberal populism might bring about changes to competition agency in situations where the law gives the government, the federal government, the right to dismiss the head of the competition authority, or to appoint some members of the board, of the plenary board of competitions. There might be a problem. In the case of Mexico, for example, the designation of the commissioners implies a process in which the president, there has to be a selection process, but whoever meets those criteria, the president sends a proposal to the Senate from the people who met the criteria. And the Senate is who determines who is going to be a commissioner. However, right now, even after several reminders and calls upon Senate from the competition authority, the commission has 3 out of 7 open positions on its board, and also the designation of the next chair is pending. The second point on how advocacy can help resilience and reaction to some populist measures is that advocacy powers are a strong instrument to point out and prevent the impositions of barriers to entry, regulated prices, the exemption of certain sectors from the competition law, and other practices that Maciej points out in his work. In many countries, enforcement efforts are not appropriate, and that's the case of Mexico, when dealing with government interventions that might reduce or even eliminate competition in some markets. This is the field for competition advocacy, even when, as Maciej rightly points out in his book, recommendations based on advocacy activities might or can be disregarded by populist governments. However, they can be the base of a stronger opposition for anti-competitive regulations or measures. Let me give you an example. In 2013, Mexico reformed its electricity industry to introduce competition. Competition was then thought as a mechanism to ensure efficiency both in the generation and wholesale markets of electricity. One of the cornerstones of this reform was to ensure competition neutrality between the publicly owned enterprise and the rest of the private competitors in these 2 markets. Regulation and strong institutions were constructed, and part of this institutional arrangement was not only the sectorial regulator, but also a strong competition authority. And these were keys for the success of this reform. However, since a couple of years ago, there has been an important change on the implementation of this regulation. Also, several amendments that de facto eliminate competition in these markets have been made. The competition authority in Mexico has been very vocal on its implication. We have issued 3 opinion letters. We have elaborated and published an advocacy document, and we have filed 2 constitutional controversies before the Supreme Court to point out the harm that this shift away from competition would imply for the efficiency of the electrical system in Mexico and for the environment. Therefore, even when the recommendations that the Commission made were not taken into account by the federal government, the Supreme Court has already filed in the Commission's favor in one of the cases. The other one is pending. And many judges have considered suspensions to private participants in other authorities' actions, in part based on the competition agency's analysis. This is an example of how advocacy can be a way of responding to some of these challenges posed by populism to the competition law system in the way Maciej proposes in his book. Well, this is not over, because in September 2021, the president presented before Congress a constitutional reform to accept the generation and commercialization of electricity from the competition regime. With this reform, the competition neutrality between the publicly owned enterprise and the rest of the competitors would be completely annulled. And the enforcement faculties for the competition authority would be eliminated in this industry. This being an example of what Maciej refers as exemptions that limit the reach of competition law in its enforcement branch. Good news is that, as the case of the other reform I commented on, the public response against this initiative has been very strong. And as a result, the discussion of it in Congress has been postponed to next year. It is also worth mentioning that one of the main arguments against this reform is that it could be a violation of Mexico's commitment under NAFTA. Therefore, even when North America is not a regional system in the way the UE is, strong advocacy actions can help to bring to the table regional risks generated by these sorts of measures against competition. Lastly, I think that through advocacy, it can be pointed out that competition policy can be a powerful tool to reach some of the objectives of certain populist governments. For example, reducing inequality or fighting corruption. A first natural approach that Maciej mentions in his research is that populist governments tend to use separatist discourse of rich versus poor, which in countries with inequalities as wide as those experienced in Mexico or other Latin American countries tend to win over more than one mind. The speech based on the distrust of liberal democracies and elites can also be fruitful on a context of generalized mistrust of institutions due to corruption that is also common in Latin America. Therefore, the aim or the claim of fighting corruption can also be a common element of populist governments. Competition can be a strong ally in these tasks. In recent years, for example, we estimated that due to the lack of competition, Mexican families pay on average a 90% overprice in basic goods. This implies that inequality could be reduced by 7.3% by introducing competition to these markets. Competition can also help a better use of public budget in procurement processes. We have in Mexico a couple of examples of how through interinstitutional cooperation with the competition authority, important savings have been generated in many institutions. For example, in 2019, the Institute of Housing came to the Commission asking for a review of its procurement normative. We did a review of it. We made some recommendations that were implemented by the Institute, and important savings around 180 million US dollars were made only by introducing competition to the Institute's procurement procedures. Therefore, there is an important opportunity to position competition as a means to an end, a way of reducing inequality and enhancing purchasing power of the poor, and a tool to better allocate public resources. The challenge is then how to show competition to some populist governments as an ally, and how to explain how these two objectives can be aligned in many cases. I would like to conclude by saying that I found Maciej's work very enlightenment, and I found many analytical elements that I'm sure can be applied to the Mexican case, as I tried to do, but also to many other cases. So I'm very interested on further discussing the proposals and the ways on how to tackle them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, José. Very interesting and very innovating comments. I think it's also very interesting to hear how Maciej works is close connected with the reality in Mexico. I would like to give again the floor over to Maciej to remarks on Maria José comments, and I think we have a few minutes after to this general discussion. So please, Maciej, feel free to make your comments.
Right. Okay. Again, I'm very grateful. And, I didn't expect that I will hear, from people from Argentina and Mexico that my work is relevant. That was not my goal. So I am very moved, I must say. So thank you very much. And yeah, and it sounds about advocacy. Advocacy is very important. And from this, what I heard from you, Maria, it seems that you in Mexico are doing really a great job in this respect, and you are trying as an agency to do your best, both in terms of promoting competition among society, but also be active when anti-competitive regulatory measures are adopted by some state authorities. I really like the example that you even decided to go to Supreme Court against certain laws that were passed. This is, by the way, I don't think that all the agencies have these competences to kind of bring directly a challenge to certain laws before Supreme or constitutional courts. So this is it seems to me a very valuable feature of Mexican system. Maybe just coming back to what I identified particularly in Central Europe, the question is if you have a very far-reaching political change, then the question is whether the voice of competition agency is heard. So this is the big question. When I was going through the national reports of Hungarian competition agencies, they have a section on advocacy, and they also had provide the numbers, and they were, the number of the comments they were submitting was really going down across the years. So that was one feature, and the other feature was that they were writing directly that their voice was ignored, and that was kind of a repetitive situation. So there were certain markets, as I mentioned, were monopolized, so they were going against that. But this voice, at least during the first 3 or 4 years, was not really listened, and then after that, if you go through these reports, you don't see them being active in that field anymore. Maybe they learn that they are not relevant. I don't know. Maybe I'm going too far. But I think this is what I want to say by this. That I think that this is a very difficult task for the competition agency to play. And I think what you said at the end, there is a need to kind of persuade the politicians that competition agency can be an ally. That's a very important aspect. The question is whether at the same time the politicians will accept that this agency wants to remain or want to be independent. So that's again, I think not a very easy easy problem to be solved. So that's just my thoughts, and thank you very much. And again, as I said, in case of Pablo, I would be happy to talk to you and learn more about Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Maciej. Is really very interesting, not only the book presentation of Maciej, but also these great comments bring a different perspective from Mexico, from Argentina. Yo creo que, I believe that Pablo and María José bring us a vision, a very broader vision of this discussion of Maciej's book. Maciej, I think it is your book not only is a very interesting book and very important to understand some populist governments, but also some liberal governments that is not exactly exempt from some problems that you present in relation to populist governments. We are almost on time. We have a few minutes, and I would give the word for each of you to say a few words for end our panel. I think if you have any comments or questions from the audience, we are free to send to Maciej. I don't want to use the time of the next discussion. So I would like to give the word first to María José again, after Pablo and Maciej for this close.
Thanks, Fabiola and Maciej. I found your counter arguments very interesting and very true. It is a huge challenge what we face at competition authorities under these contexts. However, as I was saying, I think your research and your book provides with a very interesting and useful framework to analyze these situations, to prevent them, and to better understand the risks we face, and to be better prepared for them. I hope for there be not many more cases of study for your research, but I think that many of the analytical points or arguments you make on the book are very useful in many contexts. So congratulations on the work.
Pablo.
Same here. Thank you very much once again. Thanks for the invitation. Maciej, it was a great pleasure to read your book. And honestly, I will try to reread it because at the end I had to speed up my reading. But as what María José said, and you also referred on mainly on advocacy, but also from our own experience when we were negotiating, let's say, or pushing the bill to be the new act, the new law enacted. We obviously your book was not published, but I mean we use some of the same examples or some of the same reasons to say, hey, this is a competition law is something that it works for those who are on the right, on the left, or in the middle. So in the sense of either you're populist, you're liberal. So the question now is, whenever you have a populist government, like might happen in some countries in Latin America, sometimes they go directly to control prices, for example, instead of using competition tools. That might take more time sometimes, but it definitely on the long term would be much, in my opinion, healthier than controlling prices and controlling production, etc., etc. So I think it's an ongoing discussion in our countries, but I think also your book provides very important insight and things to eat and to keep thinking about whenever we have these scenarios and variables in our countries. So thank you very much again, and congratulations on your excellent work.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much once again. Really, I didn't expect that. Thank you for finding that my work and the framework I propose is might be useful for other countries, and I strongly believe, and that was not really a counter argument. I was Maria. I was really saying that I'm impressed by the advocacy work you are doing, and this may also fit within this predictions or thinking in terms of what can you do in order to make the negative impact that may exist, make the risks more limited, basically. So really, once again, I'm impressed, and I think, by the way, this would be a great also material for the research paper to kind of think how advocacy and the advocacy framework fits within the experience that Mexico is going through at the moment. So thank you very much. I also hope that the audience that was listening to us enjoyed this. I think I can say this in my name, but I'm sure also my commentators that if you have any questions, you can also ask them via email or in any other way. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much, Maciej. Congratulations for your book. A very interesting aspects that I would be. I think you could discuss all day or many weeks. So because there are many aspects of your book, especially the propositive aspect that I congratulate you. That brings a lot of ideas for our countries to think about. This antitrust system and how to make this an important tool for economic development and also for strong the economy in populist governments. So Maciej, congratulations. Thank you very much. But also I would like to thank Maria, José, and Pablo that also bring many important insights in reflections on this work, and I think we could follow this discussion in another opportunity because it's a very interesting aspects that could be discussed along the day. So thank you very much. I would like to also thank you for the IBCI. It's a great pleasure to be here to moderate this panel. And well, thank you all the audience that is seeing and that will see this video. No, it's a great pleasure to have you with us in this 4th IBCI International Conference on Competition and Innovation. So see you, hope to see you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. See you.
Bye.
Thank you again. Bye.
Thank you.